They called them myths, folklore, superstition, the most powerful healing system ever documented. One that cured kings, purified entire cities, treated deep wounds and depression, was deliberately erased from Western medicine. Not faded away, not disproven, erased. One report, Rockefeller money. Every botanical medical school in America, gone within 28 years. Hundreds of remedies that worked for thousands of years. Not because they failed, because they couldn't be patented. Here's what stopped me cold. These remedies aren't in some obscure ancient text. They're in a book you probably own. The Bible, frankincense, myrrh, spikenard, balm of Gilead, black cumin seed, not spiritual symbols, medicines, biochemically active, clinically precise. Modern science has now confirmed exactly how they worked. The question isn't whether they were real. The question is, why were you never told? For most of human history, medicine didn't come from a factory. It came from a garden. Ancient Israel. 900 BC. No hospital. No pharmacy. But there is a healer, usually a woman, sometimes a priest, who knows exactly which plant stops a wound from festering, which resin calms a fevered mind, which seed restores a broken gut. Not guesswork, not primitive fumbling. A system, its own diagnostics, its own pharmacology, its own public health laws, recorded in precise detail across the Torah, the Psalms, the prophets, the epistles. The Mosaic Law didn't just carry spiritual commandments. It carried epidemiology, strict quarantine for infectious skin disease, mandatory hand-washing with running water, not standing basins thousands of years before germ theory, designated sanitation zones, laws forcing farmers to leave field edges unharvested, so the poor, the widow, the foreigner could access food and medicine growing wild at the borders. Healing wasn't a commodity, it was a covenant. The sick weren't a market, they were a responsibility. The pharmacy was local, accessible. Frankincense from the boswellia tree, myrrh from the comifera, spikenard carried from the Himalayas because its effect on the nervous system was that valuable. Saffron, black cumin seed, balm of Gilead, each one a precisely compounded tool in the hands of someone who knew exactly what it did and why. This system sustained populations, healed kings, contained outbreaks that should have been catastrophic. The herbalists, the apothecaries, the community healers, they weren't fringe figures. They were essential. That's the world we lost. For a long time, nobody asked why. For a while, it really did feel like progress. Late 1800s, Western civilization on a scientific high. Microscopes revealing invisible worlds. Pasteur cracking germ theory. Hospitals getting cleaner. Surgeries surviving. A new kind of doctor emerging, laboratory-trained, armed with chemistry instead of bark and resin. For the first time in history, you could isolate the exact molecule doing the healing. No village herbalist. No oral tradition. Just a clinical trial and a prescription pad. The results were real. Vaccines eliminated diseases that had massacred children for centuries. Surgical mortality collapsed. Penicillin saved millions from infections that used to be death sentences. Insulin gave diabetics decades they'd never have had. Nobody should take that away. The public fell in love with modern medicine. Who could blame them? A system that could explain why something worked. Measure dosage with precision. Replicate results and publish them for the world to verify. After centuries of guesswork and accidental poisonings, this felt like arriving somewhere safe. Doctors became the most trusted figures in society. Pharmaceutical companies, heroes of human progress. The white coat, a symbol not just of expertise, of salvation. And in the middle of all that optimism, all that momentum, all those genuine breakthroughs, the ancient remedies started disappearing. Quietly at first, then systematically, not because they stopped working, because something was happening behind the scenes that had nothing to do with science, and everything to do with money. Section. Sudden collapse. Edited version. A man named Abraham Flexner published a report. Not a doctor, not a scientist, an educator commissioned by the American Medical Association, funded by two of the most powerful financial dynasties in history, Carnegie, Rockefeller. His assignment: evaluate every medical school in North America. All 155. What existed before Flexner arrived is something you were never taught. 3 legitimate, accredited schools of medicine operating side by side in America. Allopathic physicians, forerunners of modern medicine. Homeopathic physicians, 22 fully accredited colleges by 1900, so respected Mark Twain publicly defended them in Harper's Magazine. And eclectic physicians, combining Western clinical science with botanical medicine, herbal compounding, Native American ethnobotanical knowledge. Eclectic doctors were dangerous to one specific group. They prescribed plants, whole plants, complex biological preparations that couldn't be isolated into a single chemical compound. And a single chemical compound is the only thing you can patent. You cannot patent frankincense. You cannot patent black cumin seed. You cannot patent the balm of Gilead. They grow in the ground. They belong to everyone. There is no profit in a remedy anyone can make at home. Flexner's report recommended 120 of 155 medical schools be immediately closed. The Rockefeller Foundation didn't just endorse it. They funded the aftermath. Millions exclusively to allopathic schools that restructured around patented chemical drug therapies. Schools that refused botanical, eclectic, homeopathic were denied funding, denied accreditation, denied survival. Within 28 years, every single medical school in America teaching plant-based medicine was gone. Every one. It didn't stop there. In 1938, a pharmaceutical manufacturer killed over 100 people, mostly children, using an industrial solvent as a drug sweetener. Congress responded with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, necessary in many ways, but buried inside it, something devastating. A legal definition of drugs built almost exclusively around synthetic, isolated, patentable chemicals. Whole plants, hundreds of interacting compounds, centuries of documented use, biochemically complex healing mechanisms, pushed into a legal no-man's land. Not food, not medicine, wellness products, out of the doctor's office, out of insurance coverage, out of medical school, out of reach for anyone who couldn't find them on their own. The healers who carried this knowledge for generations, discredited, unlicensed, erased, and the remedies documented in the oldest medical archive on earth, the Bible itself, went with them. Not disproven, defunded. Here's what that erasure actually cost. Not in theory, not in history books, in real human lives. The chronic pain patient on the same anti-inflammatory prescription for a decade, managing symptoms, never fixing the source, while boswellic acids from frankincense have been sitting in peer-reviewed literature for years, selectively inhibiting the exact inflammatory enzyme driving their condition. No gastric side effects, no dependency, no $400 monthly copay. The person cycling through antidepressant after antidepressant, adjusting dosages, weathering side effects, feeling like their own brain became a pharmaceutical experiment, while double-blind trials already confirmed that saffron's safranal and crocin function as natural monoamine reuptake inhibitors. Raising serotonin, raising dopamine, minimal side effects, documented in the Song of Solomon thousands of years before the first SSRI existed. The millions with chronic gut dysfunction, bloating, dysbiosis, inflammation, never once told that fermented grape preparations were prescribed in the New Testament specifically for gastrointestinal illness. That myrrh resin binds directly to opioid receptors in the central nervous system, without the addictive pathways of the synthetic opioids that have destroyed entire communities. This is not folklore. This is pharmacology. Balm of Gilead inhibiting COX enzyme pathways, the same target as ibuprofen, centuries before a chemistry lab existed to explain it. Syrian oregano physically rupturing bacterial and fungal cell membranes, the same mechanism as modern antiseptics, used for exactly that purpose in Levitical purification rituals 3,000 years ago. Mandrake containing scopolamine and atropine, still used in modern anesthesia today, reduced to a Halloween decoration. They knew. The ancient apothecaries knew. Not through randomized controlled trials. Through something more rigorous, thousands of years of direct human observation. Refined across generations. Tested on real populations facing real disease. Somewhere in the gap between what they knew and what we were allowed to learn, people suffered. People are still suffering. Not because the remedies don't exist. Not because science hasn't caught up. Because a system built on profit decided a plant in the ground wasn't worth as much as a molecule you could synthesize, patent, and sell. The cruelest part? The knowledge was never destroyed. Just buried. Waiting. In the oldest book in the world. Something has been shifting. Quietly at first. Then all at once. At the intersection of modern biochemistry, historical theology, and a public exhausted by a medical system that treats symptoms instead of people, researchers trained in conventional pharmacology started going back to the primary sources. Not as nostalgia. As science. Back to Jeremiah. Leviticus. The Song of Solomon. The letters of Paul. Asking a question the Flexner era had made professionally dangerous. What if these remedies worked? And what if we can now prove exactly why? The answers were extraordinary. Frankincense, burned in temples for millennia, dismissed as incense, contains boswellic acids, specifically AKBA, that selectively inhibit the 5-lipoxygenase enzyme, the enzyme synthesizing the pro-inflammatory leukotrienes driving autoimmune conditions, joint disorders, and certain cancers. Modern clinical research is now investigating frankincense derivatives in oncological therapeutics. Not as a spiritual gesture, as a drug candidate. Spikenard, 1 jar worth a full year's wages in the ancient world, contains sesquiterpenes that cross the blood-brain barrier and enhance GABAergic activity. The same neurological pathway targeted by benzodiazepines. The same pathway dysregulated in anxiety disorders, seizures, and chronic sleep pathology. They weren't anointing with it because it smelled beautiful. It worked. On the nervous system. In ways they could observe before they could explain. Black cumin seed, referenced in Isaiah, used across the ancient Near East as a universal protective agent, contains thymoquinone, now shown to suppress nuclear factor kappa B, one of the master regulators of systemic inflammation and tumor growth. Modern researchers are publishing on its immunomodulatory, anti-tumor, and gastroprotective potential. Isaiah was prescribing it 2,700 years ago, and it isn't just the biochemistry coming back. The framework is coming back. Psychoneuroimmunology, one of the fastest-growing fields in clinical research, has spent decades proving what biblical medicine assumed as foundational. Chronic stress and fear trigger a sustained sympathetic response that upregulates inflammatory cytokines, suppresses gut motility, and actively blocks cellular repair. The body cannot heal in a state of prolonged fear. Biblical medicine didn't just prescribe plants. Prescribed rest, community, reconciliation, Sabbath, anti-inflammatory botanicals paired with nervous system regulation, frankincense and community, myrrh and peace, black cumin seed and rest, wasn't superstition layered onto medicine. It was the medicine. The dual-action system modern integrative care is only now beginning to reconstruct. Books appeared. Researchers published. People started making things in their kitchens again. Tinctures, infused oils, decoctions, salves. Not to reject modern medicine. To recover something that should never have been taken away. In homes. In research labs. In pharmacology departments and theological seminaries finally speaking the same language. What they found wasn't primitive. It was ahead of its time. Now let's go inside the remedies. The 10 that were buried. Pulled back into the light by modern biochemistry. Never myths, just inconvenient to a system that couldn't profit from them. 1. Balm of Gilead. Is there no balm in Gilead? Jeremiah asked that over a nation that had abandoned its own healing. He didn't know how right he was. Harvested from Commiphora gileadensis resin, the most prized wound treatment in the ancient Near East. Kings paid fortunes for it. Traders built empires carrying it. Modern analysis confirmed why. Monoterpenes and sesquiterpene resins inhibit the cyclooxygenase enzyme pathway, suppressing inflammatory prostaglandins, accelerating skin repair at the cellular level, doing what ibuprofen does, thousands of years before ibuprofen existed. 2. Figs. King Hezekiah. Terminal skin boil, the kind of infected wound that killed people routinely in the ancient world. Isaiah's prescription. A fig poultice. Not a spiritual gesture. Surgery. Ficus carica contains phycin, a proteolytic enzyme that breaks down the protein bonds of dead necrotic tissue, debriding the wound exactly as a modern surgeon would. The dense sugar concentration creates an osmotic gradient that dehydrates and sterilizes bacterial colonies on contact. Figure. On an infected wound, performing the biochemical equivalent of a sterile surgical scrub. The king survived. 3. Syrian oregano, the Bible's hyssop. Leviticus prescribed hyssop, identified by modern botanists as Origanum syriacum, for purifying dwellings contaminated by leprosy and systemic mold. Its essential oil is dominated by carvacrol and thymol, phenolic monoterpenes with a hydrophobic structure that physically ruptures the lipid bilayer of bacterial and fungal cell membranes. The Levitical priests were running broad-spectrum antimicrobial decontamination of infected living spaces. They didn't have the vocabulary of microbiology. They had the results. For mandrake, Genesis records Rachel requesting it as a fertility aid. Ancient physicians documented 88 distinct clinical applications across the Mediterranean: anesthetic, sedative, antispasmodic. The chemistry is now precise. Tropane alkaloids, scopolamine, hyoscyamine, atropine, competitive antagonists at muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, blocking parasympathetic nerve impulses, reducing smooth muscle spasms, suppressing pain signals. Scopolamine and atropine are still used in modern anesthesia and emergency medicine today. The ancient apothecary had them first. 5. Spikenard. 1 jar 300 denarii, a full year's wages. When Mary of Bethany broke it open and poured it over Jesus before the crucifixion, the disciples were furious at the waste. They didn't understand what she understood. Harvested from Nardosticus jatamansi in the high-altitude Himalayas, its sesquiterpenes cross the blood-brain barrier and enhance GABAergic activity, the neurotransmitter system regulating anxiety, seizures, and genuine restorative rest. She wasn't performing an empty ritual. She was administering the most sophisticated neurological sedative in the ancient world to a man facing unimaginable trauma. 6. Frankincense. Burned in temples, carried by magi, woven through Matthew, Revelation, the Song of Solomon, now being studied in cancer laboratories. Boswellic acids, specifically AKBA, selectively inhibit 5-lipoxygenase, the enzyme synthesizing the pro-inflammatory leukotrienes implicated in autoimmune disorders, chronic joint disease, tumor proliferation. The same resin that perfumed ancient temples is now a serious oncological research target. 7. Myrrh. Antiseptic, analgesic, embalming agent, wound treatment, oral rinse. Modern neuropharmacology identified why. Furanodiene sesquiterpenes in myrrh resin bind directly to opioid receptors in the central nervous system, producing analgesic effects comparable to mild opiates. Without the addictive pathways, without the dependency, without the overdose risk that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives from synthetic opioids in 2 decades. The pharmacological story, the opioid receptor interaction, the pain management potential, remains almost entirely outside mainstream medical conversation. It shouldn't. 8. Saffron. Celebrated in the Song of Solomon. Prescribed across the ancient world for depression, menstrual pain, emotional dysregulation. Double-blind trials have now validated every single application. Safranal and crocin, primary active compounds in Crocus sativus, function as natural monoamine reuptake inhibitors, raising serotonin, raising dopamine, raising norepinephrine, same neurotransmitter systems as modern antidepressants. Without the sexual dysfunction, without the emotional blunting, without the withdrawal syndromes millions of SSRI patients know intimately. The ancient world's antidepressant was a flower. It worked. 9. Black cumin seed. A remedy for every disease except death. That's what ancient Near Eastern tradition said about it. Isaiah referenced it. Modern biochemistry spent decades figuring out why the reverence was justified. Thymoquinone, primary bioactive compound in Nigella sativa, suppresses nuclear factor kappa B, master regulator of systemic inflammation, down-regulates pro-inflammatory cytokines, modulates antioxidant enzymes, anti-tumor, immunomodulatory, gastroprotective activity across dozens of peer-reviewed studies. One seed, one compound, touching nearly every major chronic disease pathway in the human body. Isaiah knew. We are only now catching up. 10. Medicinal wine. Use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. Paul to Timothy. For centuries read as a casual pastoral note. It wasn't. In a world where water sources were contaminated with pathogens virtually everywhere, fermented grape preparations were frontline medicine. Ethanol and polyphenol acting as antimicrobials in the upper gastrointestinal tract. Resveratrol selectively promoting beneficial gut microbiota, Bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, while suppressing pathogenic colonies. Paul wasn't making a lifestyle suggestion. He was prescribing a gut microbiome intervention. 2,000 years before the word microbiome existed. These weren't myths, not primitive superstitions dressed in religious language. A pharmacopoeia precise, observed, refined across millennia, buried under a century of patent law and profit motive. But here's what the Flexner report could not touch. The plants still grow. The biochemistry still works. The knowledge survived in theological texts, ethnobotanical archives, the kitchens of healers who refused to stop. Now in peer-reviewed literature from researchers who followed the evidence wherever it led, even when it led back 3,000 years. The lost apothecary is not lost. Your great-grandmother knew some of this. Her great-grandmother knew all of it. And now so do you. If this made you angry, curious, hungry to go deeper, share it. The most powerful thing that happened to this knowledge wasn't suppression. It's that ordinary people kept passing it forward anyway. That's how it survived. That's how it wins. If this changed how you think about the ground beneath your feet, hit like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe. Every week this channel goes deeper into the intersections of ancient wisdom, modern science, and the future that is still possible. The next video goes even deeper underground. I will see you there.